This is special Gavel Alaska coverage of the 2025 State of the State Address from KTOO. In the studio, I'm Claire Strimple, Managing Editor. At 7 o'clock, we'll bring you live special coverage of Governor Mike Dunleavy's State of the State Address to the Alaska Legislature. You can watch Gavel Alaska's video coverage of the speech at KTOO 360 TV or at our website at ktoo.org. In the meantime, I'm joined by Alaska Legislative Digest publisher Tim Bradner, Alaska Public Media state government reporter Eric Stone, live from the halls of the state capitol, and Alaska Beacon editor-in-chief Andrew Kitchenman to provide some context for tonight's speech. Tim also hosts Capitol Views, which airs on KTOO 360 TV. Tim, Eric, Andrew, thanks for joining us.
So glad to be here.
Hi, Claire.
A new legislature gavelled in last week. Each year, they invite the governor to come and speak about his legislative priorities for the year ahead. This will be the governor's 7th State of the State address, and how well his priorities align with the will of the legislature, or how well the two can work together, will determine how successful he might be. This year, the makeup of the legislature has shifted, and with it, the balance of power. Andrew, could you tell us a little about that shift? We can start with the House.
Sure. So the House majority has seen a significant shift in terms of moving from a primarily Republican majority for the past 2 years to a primarily Democratic majority. Both the previous majority and the current one had some independent members, including the rural Alaska delegation from northern and western Alaska. So those are the 4 legislative districts that have been represented in both majorities. There have been some seats that have changed hands as well. And so this is a House that is not necessarily aligned with the governor, but is aligned with the Senate. So the Senate majority has also changed somewhat, but not as stark a change as the House. The Senate has 3 fewer members in the majority. It is a bipartisan majority, mostly Democratic, and it is somewhat fewer Republicans than the previous majority. What both sides have in common is a focus on issues like education funding and pensions, which we may get into, but they aren't necessarily the same priorities as the governor, which is very much focused on resource development, which I think there's broad support for, but for certain education policies that maybe there is not inside the majorities in the legislature. That being said, the governor, the legislature, they all want to get along, or they all want to accomplish things, presumably, and if they're going to have to get along.
Thanks. And Eric, you're inside the Capitol every day. What have you noticed in terms of differences between this legislature compared to the previous one?
Well, as Andrew said, the composition is very different. We have bipartisan majorities in control of both chambers. That what I say would be the primary difference. This is the first time since I believe 1981 that we've had Democrats in majorities in both coalitions. The House and the Senate, they're wasting no time getting to work. There is all kinds of stuff going on. They're looking to pass education funding bills early. They're looking to pass an election reform bill early, they said today. So I would say those are sort of the primary differences. It's the composition. It's who's in it and who's in control.
Great. So just last week, Senate President Republican Gary Stevens of Kodiak and House Majority Leader Republican Representative Chuck Kopp of Anchorage were talking about their respective majorities working together well. And one shift they both highlighted was that lawmakers have heard from the electorate that education is a priority. Here's Senator Stevens on Alaska Insight last week.
People have said to me, sure, I want my dividend. I like a big dividend, but I also see my school district suffering. and I'm willing to give up a little bit of my dividend in order to fund our school. So I think that's a major change. You know, in the past, often the dividend has been the big issue, and it's sort of the third rail. If you touch that, you're dead in the legislature. But I think people have accepted the fact that education is maybe more important than the dividend.
That was Senator Stevens on Alaska Insight last week, and the full episode is available to view at alaskapublic.org. Tim, you've been covering the Capitol for a long time. Does this feel like a shift to you?
There is a bit of a shift. A few years ago, the dividend was the issue that sort of tied the legislature up at the end of it. There was a feeling that not much could happen until something is done and decisions are made with the dividend. So really, it was something that froze the legislature up in right at the end. And I think that's changed now. I think there's a feeling in the Capitol that maybe they could get by with a lesser dividend, a smaller one. And a lot of legislators on the campaign trail this summer noted that there wasn't really that much talk about the dividend anymore when they went door to door. Even in conservative districts like the Kenai Peninsula, people just, they were concerned about schools, getting the roads plowed, really basic public services like that, not so much the PFD. So that's kind of refreshing. Maybe we're turning the corner a little bit.
Yeah, and Andrew, anything to add?
Well, sure. I think that the dividend is still a significant issue, and certainly in terms of setting a permanent dividend, there hasn't been, as far as I can tell, a lot of progress on that front. The governor still very much wants a larger dividend, and it seems like both majorities will largely, I'm not speaking about every member, but largely be willing to accept dividends along the lines of what we've seen for most of the last 8 years. And since there's such a gap between the governor and the two majorities, I wouldn't necessarily expect a resolution to setting a new formula, because we haven't been following the formula for almost a decade. I wouldn't necessarily expect a resolution to that in the next 2 years.
And Eric, last year the governor vetoed an education bill that would have permanently increased the school funding formula, in part because it did not include his proposal aimed at boosting the state's charter schools. Have you heard murmurs in the halls? Can we expect charter schools and school choice to recur this year?
Well, yeah, I do expect charter schools and school choice generally to continue to be a priority for the governor. I believe it was yesterday, he was talking about National School Choice Week. Charter schools, basically alternative education options, including homeschooling, correspondence schooling, charter schools. All of these are big priorities that the governor has.
Great. And leaders in both the House and Senate have also highlighted the budget. Traditionally, that process starts with the governor. And this year, Governor Dunleavy's proposed budget drops the one-time spending from last year, including the increase to education funding, but includes spending for a $3,800 PFD. Notably, that budget incurs a $1.5 billion deficit. Andrew, can you tell us about the context? $1.5 billion seems like a lot of money to pull from savings.
Yeah, there's a few different ways you can look at it. One is to compare it to the size of the savings account that the state has traditionally used when it's had a budget deficit, which is the constitutional budget reserve. And that currently has $2.8 billion in it. So that $1.5 billion deficit would actually take up most of the money that's reserved in the constitutional budget reserve. Another way of looking at it is comparing it to the size of the permanent fund. And the permanent fund is right at about $80 billion. So you could say 1.5 billion, maybe not so large compared to that. But the portion of the permanent fund that is spendable, that's in the earnings reserve, is less than about 10 billion. So at that point, 1.5 would be a pretty big chunk of that. And one last way I would frame of reference for looking at that $1.5 billion figure is to compare it to how much revenue is coming into the state. and that's only about $6 billion. So on top of that $6 billion, the budget would be about, another quarter or 20% higher on top of that.
Great. And at a December news conference, Eric, you asked about spending from savings to support a big PFD payout. Here's what the governor had to say in December.
The PFD's in law, just like some of these other programs are in law. You don't have enough revenue, but you have savings. So you have to make a choice as to whether you're going to reduce education or reduce other aspects of the program to get that budget balance.
That was Governor Dunleavy speaking at a news conference in December. Eric, how do you think that will go over with this legislative makeup this year?
Well, I would not expect the governor's PFD to become law. I would not expect the $3,800 PFDs he put in his budget to become a reality. In fact, just today, at a Senate Majority News Conference, folks there were talking about sort of what they might expect. And the last couple of years, they've followed a 25-75 split. 25% of the draw, the 5% draw on the permanent fund every year being set aside for PFDs, the rest going to the rest of state government. And doing that this year puts the state in a deficit. So even the smaller PFDs that generally these sorts of majorities have supported, are not necessarily looking affordable without significant spending from state savings that people indicate is not likely to win a whole lot of support.
And the governor pointed to resources for revenue, and there have been some major shifts on the resource development front. Last year at this time, Dunleavy himself was issuing executive orders. This year, he's been praising a series of resource-related executive orders from President Donald Trump. That order, Unleashing Alaska's Extraordinary Resource Potential, it's called, calls for more drilling, mining, and logging in Alaska. Here's what the governor had to say at a recent news conference.
And so, from my perspective, this is happy days are here again, to be perfectly honest with you. This is like unwrapping a gigantic sled of Christmas presents for the state of Alaska.
Eric, tell us about this order and the governor's attitude at this press conference and what it could mean for the state of Alaska.
Yeah, so the order basically rolls back a bunch of Biden-era policies that were restricting development, that were sort of taking lands off the table for development. Things like folks might remember, there were these restrictions in something called the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska, which basically made it very, very difficult to drill on that piece of land. People say it's important for subsistence resources and things like that. But yeah, so that was a lot of what Trump rolled back. There were also things like the King Cove land swap happening, which is basically a land swap with the Eisenbeck National Wildlife Refuge and the King Cove Corporation, allowing the folks in King Cove access to an all-weather airport in Cold Bay. That's been a priority issue for many years. Dunleavy was very, very, very. He praised Trump a lot. He said thank you. I couldn't even count the number of times. This is a governor who has a good relationship with Donald Trump, who wants to maintain that relationship with Donald Trump. Even when he was asked about another executive order that seeks to rename Denali as Mount McKinley, he declined to share his own opinion, said, I want to speak with Trump first. He's putting himself pretty close to the president.
Yeah, and Tim, do you have anything to add about potential opportunities here for Alaska?
Well, a couple of things that people have said to me is that the executive orders do not automatically waive all the restrictions. It's been explained to me that these are just advisory to the agencies. The agencies take the executive order. It's asking them to look at their rules and regulations and see what they can do. The rules and regulations, and in some cases the statutes, are still in place. There are environmental impact statements that would have to be done to open up ANWR again and to do a lot of opening up of the National Petroleum Reserve. Those things take time. And I think there'll be lawsuits, and that's going to take time. We have a pretty tough federal judge in Alaska who has got a lot of experience with North Slope litigation, very knowledgeable. And I don't think she's going to be quite a rollover for the president. So I think we're in for an interesting time. I don't think these things are going to happen right away. One other thing I'd like to say is that there's a kind of a disconnect in what the president is attempting. He wants to unleash a lot of oil drilling and flood the market with oil to bring oil prices down for consumers. But that's not good for Alaska. And it also is not good for the industry up here because they need, modestly high oil prices in order to make these new projects economic. So I think there's we have a lot is yet to come on this. I don't think it's quite the time to rejoice yet.
Hmm. And on that note, we're going to switch over to talking about some of the pre-filed bills this year. Eric, you recently covered some of these pre-filed bills by state legislators, an early indicator of their priorities. 2 pre-filed bills include proposals that would revive a pension program for state employees. Pension revival had some support last year, but ultimately failed due to cost concerns. Could you tell us about the bills filed by Juneau Senator Jesse Keel and Anchorage Republican Kathy Giessel?
Absolutely, yeah. So the Senate bill from Kathy Giessel looks a whole lot like the pension program that made its way through the Senate last year and ultimately died in the House. There is another proposal from Senator Jesse Keel, a Juneau Democrat, who put forward a proposal that would basically allow people to choose whether they have a 401k or a pension style retirement system. The bill from Kathy Giessel would have people move in to the defined benefit system, and you can see behind me the senators are filing into the chamber. We see some other folks coming by as well. But yeah, so that's basically a look at what the pension bills are like. I would expect some movement on those this session. There, as was said at the top, the majorities are aligned on that as a priority. So we'll have to see where that goes, and we'll have to see, if they're able to get something across the finish line here in the Capitol, and what fate that meets at the governor's desk.
Yeah, and climate concerns spurred at least one pre-filed bill. There is a tension in Alaska that our state's tremendous resource extraction potential has some tension with ongoing concerns about human-caused climate change. Alaskans are worried about energy and energy costs, while this winter has been highly unusual with record high temperatures and low snowfall across the state. That bill from Senator Stedman, a Republican from Sitka, takes this on. KTOO's Clarice Larson has the story from mid-January.
Alaska State Senator Bert Stedman says the state needs to offer its own flood insurance alternative because the federal government's current policies are inadequate and expensive for many Alaskans.
They're getting ripped off by the federal government on flood insurance. They're getting an economic shotgun held to their head on how they can rebuild their properties. That's frankly unfair.
He proposed a bill that would create an Alaska Flood Authority to manage a state flood insurance fund. His aim is to provide more coverage at a lower cost to homeowners, as human-fueled climate change is making disasters like these a more frequent reality in Alaska. Stedman is a Republican who represents Southeast Alaska communities like Sitka and Wrangell that have experienced destructive or deadly landslides in recent years. So the bill's language includes mud flow as a type of flooding, which could mean certain landslides could fall under the proposed state coverage. His proposal comes after 2 large flood disasters last year in other parts of the state. Juneau experienced record-breaking flooding from a glacier outburst, and lower Kuskokwim River communities faced historic breakup flooding, inundating homes and community services. Stedman says the Alaska-specific flood insurance policy would be a cheaper alternative to the federal program because it would be tailored to insure just the state's floods, not the nation's.
The concern that we have is, especially along the coast, we're pushed into this federal flood insurance program, but the rates that they charge are excessive.
Most standard home insurance policies don't cover flood damage. Flood coverage is typically a separate addition. Pretty much the only place you'll be able to find that type of coverage is through the NFIP, or the National Flood Insurance Program. The federal government offers its own flood coverage because private insurers have historically shied away from it. In some coastal communities in Alaska, homeowners are required to have the additional flood coverage. And Stedman says that can get really expensive.
There's a lot of problems with the federal flood insurance program. The first order of the day is to get the subject matter in front of the legislators and start educating them so they understand the premium ripoff that our citizens have been paying for decades.
The bill's language says the authority wouldn't be allowed to charge a rate that is, quote, excessive, inadequate, or unfairly discriminatory. And the rates would be determined based on historical flood and damage data. There's no fiscal note on the bill yet, but Stedman estimates it could cost the state several $1 million in seed money. Emil Mackey is an insurance agent in Juneau, and he knows his way around what policies are available for residents in Southeast Alaska. He's excited about some aspects of the bill, but has doubts that the rates of a state program would actually be lower.
What you have to understand is the National Flood Insurance Program is subsidized by the federal government. If we create this, the only way to do that is to also subsidize the program. And I just don't see the need.
But what he does see the need for is landslide insurance. The mudslide language in Stedman's bill is a start. Getting landslide insurance in the rainy and mountainous regions of Southeast Alaska is historically difficult. He chalks it up to the growing frequency of destructive landslides in the region and how that's changing the way insurers view risk.
Where the need is really for like landslide insurance, because we don't have any insurers in the state that do landslides, and I would like to see something like this.
Stedman says he hopes that landslides are a part of the discussion as the bill moves through the legislature, but they are not the main focus of the bill. In Juneau, I'm Clarice Larson.
Andrew, are we seeing indications that the legislature is looking to balance affordable energy supply for Alaskans and generating revenue from energy exports with responding to the causes and factors of climate change?
Well, I really think that the focus is on production and resource extraction. There's a lot of interest in energy efficiency. I think it has less at the state policy level, has less to do with climate change and more to do with the cost of energy in the state and how things that would reduce state consumption would reduce the cost.
I appreciate that. And in a recent news conference, Dunleavy himself gave a preview of some topics he might discuss this evening. He said Alaskans could expect to see land bills, energy bills, and executive orders on agriculture come from his office. He said he was going to answer the questions of how Alaska controls its own destiny, becomes more competitive, and takes advantage of its resources. Here's what he had to say.
There is no reason why Alaska shouldn't be one of the richest states in the country. There's no reason why Alaska shouldn't have over 1 million people here in a landmass the size of a subcontinent. There's no reason why we shouldn't have as much opportunity here as possible. It's not because we've run out of the resource, we haven't run out of the gas, as I said. It's because we're running out of the will to do what those like Seward and others did before us when they came to Alaska.
Tim, what are your thoughts? Has Alaska run out of the will when it comes to those resources?
I don't think so, but I think the people are frankly also going to be focused on more near-term concerns. Like a huge issue at this legislature is going to be the security of energy supplies for South Central Alaska, potential shortages of natural gas, what to do about that. These are short-term problems. Are we going to import liquefied natural gas? What's that going to add to the cost of energy? Should we build a pipeline from the North Slope? And who's going to pay for that? Is it going to have to be paid for by the permanent fund? So those are really concrete issues that we're facing this winter, and the legislature is going to be spending a lot of time on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the governor has claimed that Alaska could produce trillions of dollars in wealth. Do you think Trump's executive orders could help open up that much income?
Claire, I think that's going to take a long time to answer. I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, viewing what the time it took to implement some of Trump's policies in his first presidency, it might take the entire 4 years to make some of these things begin to happen. And frankly, what industry is concerned about is the likelihood of a swing in the elections next time. I mean, how can they could look forward to another 4 years? You could have another President Obama or President Biden, those kind of policies coming back. So are they going to be able to make the long-term investments to make these resource development projects happen with that kind of uncertainty out there? We seem to swing in policies every 4 years.
Hmm. And until then, have you picked up on any clues that Dunleavy might have policy proposals to address that energy crunch you mentioned?
In terms of Cook Inlet natural gas, I think I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. He has talked that he probably would. We know that there's ideas like royalty reduction out there for Cook Inlet gas, subsidies to bring another jackup rig in to help drill more wells. Those ideas were talked about last year extensively, and we'll probably see more discussion of that this winter. But the governor may have some new ideas, and they have tried to have lease sales in Cook Inlet offer more generous terms on the lease sales, and frankly, it hasn't worked. Um, so that has been kind of a disappointment to both the governor and to others.
Yeah, you touched on the lease sales. Last year, before the oil lease sale in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, you and others predicted there would be little interest. As it turned out, there were no bids, and you cited onerous lease terms and restrictions, among other things. Could the new administration's resource policies spur interest in future sales?
Well, it could. I mean, it's quite possible. The quickest way that President Trump could change that would be to simply try to undo former Secretary Haaland's uh, cancellation of the ADA's leases from the previous lease sale, because those are still pending. And there's a court case that has to be decided, and the administration could simply try to drop that cancellation. That would put ADA back in business. It would put the original leases back in business. But I think even with that, you're going to see litigation. Interesting problem. Which environmental impact statement prevails? The more industry favorable Trump environmental impact statement from 2020 or the more restrictive environmental impact statement by the recent Biden administration. So those kind of conflicts will have to be worked out. On the other hand, companies uh, may decide to give it a shot if they feel that there's going to be a new president and a more favorable attitude toward it. That was one of the reasons why people were not enthused about the original and even the second Anwar lease sale, because they felt that there would be an unfriendly federal administration. So that may change. But frankly, I don't expect a lot of big changes in the Anwar bidding.
And Andrew, you've been, covering state affairs for a long time. Do you see any shifts this year with the new administration? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's an exciting time for the governor. It's also a kind of late time in his administration. He's been the governor for more than 6 years, and he has less than 2 years left. He's excited about the federal administration. He's eager and vocal about working with it, but there's limited amount of time for the governor to advance that agenda just in terms of his own time in office. So if things get going now in his less than 2 years in office, as a result of working with the Trump administration, we may not see the consequences for quite a bit after that.
I appreciate that. So it looks like the House is filling up right now, but no immediate indication that they've gavelled in. If you're just joining us, this is special coverage of Governor Mike Dunleavy's State of the State address from Gavel, Alaska, and KTOO. We're standing by in Juneau for the governor. I've got Andrew Kitchenman of the Alaska Beacon and Tim Bradner of the Alaska Legislative Report here with me. We're broadcasting today on KTOO 360 TV and on public radio stations across the state. We're also streaming at ktoo.org. The Alaska legislature has a tradition of inviting the congressional delegation to deliver an address while they're in session. we'll hear from Senators Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan and Representative Nick Begich in the coming weeks. Representative Begich is scheduled to address the legislature on Thursday, February 20th. Senators Murkowski and Sullivan will address the legislature in March. The State of the Judiciary speech is scheduled for Wednesday, February 12th at 11 a.m. And it looks like the House of Representatives is coming in, but I don't see if the Senate has gavelled in yet. The governor will have two guests tonight in his speech. They include Alaska State Trooper Sergeant Jared Knoll and Rugby Olympian Aliv Kelter. A little background on those guests. Alaska State Trooper Sergeant Jared Knoll is the supervisor for the Mat-Su Narcotics Enforcement Team, one of 6 regional trooper-led drug task forces in Alaska, and has served the state as an Alaska State Trooper since 2011. He previously worked as a patrol trooper responding to misdemeanor and felony calls for service and as a drug investigator prior to being promoted to his assignment. Through efforts of Sergeant Knoll and his regional task force, millions of potentially fatal doses of fentanyl have been seized, along with 175 pounds of illegal drugs. Sergeant Knoll was awarded the DPS Purple Heart in 2015 and a commendation for meritorious service in 2017. Oh, and it looks like we're seeing the House and Senate gavel in. That means the bodies have convened. Let's see what we have going on here. All right, it looks like they're taking a little more time before we go to the governor.
And all members be shown as present.
Thank you. Without objection, so ordered. Will Senator Kawasaki and Representative Holland please escort the governor into the chamber for a joint session?
Senators Kawasaki of Fairbanks and Representative Holland of Anchorage have been asked to escort the governor to the House chamber. They've left the chamber as we await the governor. And if you are just joining us, this is special coverage of Governor Mike Dunleavy's State of the State address from Gavel, Alaska, and KTOO. We're standing by in Juneau for the governor. And we're broadcasting today on KTOO 360 TV and on public radio stations across the state. We're also streaming on KTOO.org. And we're still standing by for the governor. He should be coming down the hall to the House of Representatives on the second floor of the state capitol at any moment now. We've got photographers waiting with their cameras poised to see him come in. But apparently they're walking slowly to the House of Representatives today. Excellent. And still no sight of the governor. The House of Representatives and the Senate are still waiting in the House chambers. And while he may be slow to enter tonight, last year he was a day late due to a flight issue, so this is nothing like that wait. All right. Photographers are still waiting in the halls. If you're just joining us, we're waiting for the Governor Mike Dunleavy's State of the State address. We're here on Gavel, Alaska and KTOO. We're broadcasting on KTOO 360 TV and on public radio stations across the state. We're also streaming on KTOO.org. And we're standing by for the governor. Senator Kawasaki of Fairbanks and Representative Holland of Anchorage have gone to find him. And so there's bated breath on the second floor of the Capitol. And it looks like some of the governor's staff is coming down the hall. So signs of movement, but no sign yet of the governor. Here we go. Escorted by Senator Kawasaki of Fairbanks and Representative Holland of Anchorage, Governor Dunleavy is making his way into the chamber now. Hope we've got reporters running ahead to catch video and photo of the governor.
Ladies and gentlemen, the governor of the great state of Alaska.
Now here's Governor Dunleavy. The governor's welcome.
I got a little cold today, so I'll do the best I can. A little cold.
Full house. Full house in Senate. Anyway, so I want to thank you all. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Dahlstrom, Senate President Stevens, Speaker Edgman, and members of the 34th Legislature. I want to thank you for the invitation to speak to you tonight, and to our fellow Alaskans as well. Got a bit of a cold here, folks. Got to bear with me. So before I continue, I want to recognize my wife and the mother of our three daughters, Maggie, Catherine Seal, my wife, First Lady Rose Dunleavy. Thank you, Rose. Thank you for being such a great mom and the rock of our household, seriously. I'd also like to recognize the members of my cabinet in attendance tonight. Could you please stand and be recognized? Cabinet. Thank you for everything you're doing for the great state of Alaska. I appreciate it very much. To the members of the legislature, welcome, and thank you for being here to represent your fellow Alaskans. As I look around this room, I see many familiar faces and many new ones as well. Whether this is your first session or your fifth, what we all have in common is that we were sent here by fellow Alaskans. We ask the people of Alaska for their trust and for the honor and responsibility to serve their interest here in Juneau. We can't ever forget that. As I begin my 7th year in office, I know I haven't. We were voted in by the people, but we know that the halls here are also filled with special interests. As I've always said, there's nothing wrong with special interests, but they don't speak on behalf of the people. We govern for those who get up every day and go to work and take care of their families, but don't necessarily have a lobbyist here in Juneau. We govern for the parent sending their kids off to school every day, expecting them to receive the best education possible. We govern for the elders who may rely on their communities to help fill their freezers or to gather firewood to keep them warm during the winter. Whatever policies we make down here, the ultimate question should not be how we impact the special interests. They're never going to be happy no matter what. We know that. The question we must always ask ourselves is how our actions will impact our constituents. For my time in this office, it's the 4th quarter. For some of you, it's the 1st. For others, well, let's just say it's overtime. And governors don't get to play overtime under our Constitution. For me, the clock is always ticking, and I have no intention of running out the clock and taking a knee with the time we have left. We organize in the teams down here in Juneau as well, and naturally, there's going to be some competition. You even have a scoreboard over there that keeps track of when you push that red or green button on your desk. but we can't lose sight of the fact that in the end, we're all on the same team. We're on the team that represented by the blue sky and the gold of these 8 stars. We're on Alaska's team. That's who we're playing for. So I'm optimistic about this final quarter, and that's because I can look back at the past 6 years and see what we've accomplished by working together as a team of Alaskans to fulfill the destiny embedded in our state motto, quote, North to the future. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you, once again, to get our initiatives across the board for all Alaskans. So, how is our state doing? And this is an important question. What is our state of the state? So I'm going to go over some facts for us here. Because of our work accomplished together in a bipartisan fashion, the state of the state is heading in the right direction. And I'd like to share some of those stats with you tonight. Our population is not only stabilized, but has grown from about 734,000 in 2020 to more than 741,000 in 2024. A combination of immigration plus births has helped raise our population to the highest level since 2017. Our jobs are growing as well. Last year, we added more than 6,000 new jobs. And overall, jobs are nearly 4,000 greater than in 2019 before we were hit by the pandemic. And Alaska is projected to add another 5,300 jobs in 2025, which would break the all-time high reached in 2015. Our jobs grew at a faster rate than the rest of the U.S. for each of the past 2 years. Our wage growth was 6.4%, while the rest of the country averaged 5.5%. The unemployment rate in Alaska averaged 4.6% in 2024, well under the 10-year average of 5.9% for Alaska. Our investments are also growing as well. Assets managed by the Department of Revenue grew by nearly $600 million in 2024, the best performance in 10 years. The Alaska Permanent Fund has grown by nearly $16 billion since 2020 and is projected to reach the $100 billion milestone by 2031. The POMV draw on the Permanent Fund is scheduled for $3.65 billion in 2025 and projected at nearly $3.8 billion for 2026. Our state investment bank, known as ADA, grew its net income to a record high of $66 million in 2024 and has paid the state nearly $500 million in dividends since 1997. ADA is also leading our efforts for the biggest resource developments in Alaska's history to unlock our oil, our gas, and our minerals, including critical assets such as antimony and cobalt. Our airport in Anchorage, the second busiest cargo hub in the U.S., and fourth busiest, sometimes third, but fourth busiest in the world, is also growing. 5 new cargo carriers moved in last year, and cargo activity grew by nearly 5% during that time. In addition, Delta and United announced plans to expand their operations in Alaska, and WestJet will begin its first ever service between Anchorage and Calgary this summer. Activity on the North Slope is also growing as well. First oil from Phase 1 of the Santos Repsol Pikka project is scheduled for 2026, with peak production estimated at 80,000 barrels per day. Pikka Phase 2 is projected to produce another 80,000 barrels per day at peak production as well. The Willow project by ConocoPhillips is anticipated to produce at peak production 180,000 barrels per day starting in 2029. The overall investment is anticipated in that project to be over $8 billion, with approximately 2,500 jobs created during the development of Willow. In addition, the Nuna project, also by ConocoPhillips, is now in production with 20,000 barrels anticipated per day. 2024, Hillcorp also invested around $870 million into oil and gas in Alaska. In 2024, Hillcorp produced 39 million barrels of oil on the North Slope, a 2% increase compared to 2023. In 2025, they plan to spend over $900 million on energy projects in Alaska and plan on producing 41 million barrels of oil on the North Slope, a 5% increase compared to 2024. There is additional work on the slope that will likely add thousands more barrels of oil in the very near future. There's also positive news on the mining front as well. The Red Dog mine received approval from the federal government for its permit to build a road to an additional find that will extend the life of that mine. The Graphite 1 deposit, the largest in North America, which is north of Nome, continues to move ahead with support from a Defense Department grant. Construction could begin in that project by 2027, and the mine could be producing as early as 2029. Our Alaska Energy Authority, also known as AEA, is also moving ahead with a number of important energy projects that will reduce our reliance on gas. The Dixon Diversion Project will be a $342 million expansion of Bradley Lake, the largest hydroelectric facility in Alaska. It'll benefit 550,000 Alaskans, or 75% of the state's population. And construction is scheduled to begin in 2027. During construction, estimates are for 3,250 jobs with a total economic output estimated at $584 million. Another energy project is the Sterling to Quartz Creek transmission upgrade. It'll help to modernize the rail belt's aging transmission system, which, as we know, is over 50 years old. This line carries 88% of the energy generated by Bradley Lake. Construction began this year and should be completed by 2028. During construction, an estimated 460 jobs will be created with a total economic output of approximately $96 million. One other project is the high voltage direct current line, or HVDC, submarine transmission line from the Kiski to Beluga. Construction should start in 2027. Again, during construction, it's estimated that 1,470 jobs should result in a total economic output of $332 million. That's 5,180 jobs in the next 6 years and over $1 billion, that's with a B, $1 billion in combined economic activity from these projects. This is great news for Alaska. The Alaska Liquefied Natural Gas Project is also progressing. With all federal permits in hand, rights of ways defined, sellers and buyers of gas in negotiations, and builders, operators, and financiers discussing partnerships, the decades-old dream of cheap, plentiful natural gas may soon be a reality with signed agreements on the near horizon. This project, supported by the Biden administration and championed by the Trump administration, will be the largest LNG project in the world. Thousands of great-paying jobs, reduced energy costs, long-term energy stability, and industry moving to Alaska will be the result. So as you can see, there's quite a lot happening here in the great state of Alaska. Through our hard work together, we've also made Alaska a safer place by coming together to reform our criminal justice system and put the rights of victims ahead of criminals. We've rebuilt our ranks of state troopers and village public safety officers. When I took office, there were just 382 budgeted state and wildlife trooper positions. Today, we're at 411 positions, and I'm requesting an additional 5 troopers in my budget to reopen the shuttered Trapper Creek post. We have 77 VPSOs serving rural Alaskans as first responders, the highest number we've had since 2014. My proposed budget asks for funding 5 more of these positions. We've added 4 dedicated MMIP investigators and 3 additional child crime investigators to solve cases in rural Alaska. We cleared the sex assault test kit backlog and introduced legislation to create a tracking system for these kits to ensure such a backlog never happens again. We're also collecting long overdue DNA. Like the processing of sexual assault kits, this evidence helps bring justice to victims and accountability for criminals. The stats don't lie. Our overall crime rate is down 37% since 2018. Property crime is also down 42%. Violent crime is down 17%. Felony sexual assault is down 27% as well. There is still much more work to be done to ensure every Alaskan, no matter who they are or where they live, can feel safe in their homes and communities. At the same time, we should be proud of the progress we've made so far. And I want to thank the members of the legislature, past and present, who have supported this administration's request for more resources to protect Alaskans and to deliver justice to those who would do them harm. I'll be asking for your support again this year for more state troopers and more PSOs, more special investigators, and more response resources to double down on making Alaska safer. Together, we'll make sure that the only people who don't feel safe in Alaska are the criminals. But as I mentioned, we still have a lot to do. We're confronting a crisis of fentanyl being trafficked into our state that must be stopped. Last year, with your help, we passed enhanced sentencing up to second-degree murder for those who deal in this poison that results in the death of Alaskans. When I announced this legislation in October 2022, it was a threat. Tonight, it's a promise. To those who are still dealing and poisoning Alaskans, justice is coming. So I strongly suggest leaving our great state now, where you're going to be staying here a very long time, courtesy of our Department of Corrections. The cartels aren't going to stop trying, though. And for the drugs that make it through, our state troopers will continue to lead the interdiction efforts. In 2018, our troopers seized 78 pounds of illegal drugs. Last year, their efforts led to the seizure of more than 572 pounds of drugs. More than 24 troopers across the state in rural and urban areas have doubled down on this effort over the past 3 years. They've seized tens of millions of doses of potentially lethal drugs as soon as they touch down in Alaska, before they ever reach our streets. These deadly drugs often come in small packages through our mail system. Last year, the U.S. Postal Service actually named Alaska state troopers as a national exemplary partner as the most productive law enforcement agency in the country at stopping the flow of illicit drugs into our communities. And like you, I'd like to take this moment to congratulate our troopers for this honor and their efforts. And once again, thank you guys for everything you're doing. A leader in these efforts is Sergeant Jared Knoll of the Alaska State Troopers, who is based in the Mat-Su with the statewide drug enforcement unit. He joined the troopers in 2011 on patrol before transferring to the drug enforcement unit in 2018. And he was promoted to sergeant in 2021. Sergeant Knoll helped lead a multi-agency effort last year over several months, tracking dealers, selling drugs and fentanyl poison in our Mat-Su and Kenai Peninsula communities. Not only did it lead to the indictments of 4 individuals involved in a multi-state trafficking operation, but they also seized over 75 pounds of drugs, including heroin, meth, cocaine, and more than 35 pounds of fentanyl. That's nearly 9 million fatal doses of fentanyl, or enough to kill every Alaskan more than 10 times over. There's no doubt that this work by Sergeant Knoll and his fellow law enforcement officers saved countless lives, and we're so grateful for all they're doing to protect Alaskans. Sergeant Knoll, you are standing. but I want to recognize you on behalf of all the troopers and your efforts to keep Alaskans safe, and again, on the efforts of your brothers and sisters in law enforcement at all levels. Thank you for everything you guys are doing. Again, thank you, Sergeant Nolan, your brothers and sisters in law enforcement, for everything you're doing for the great state of Alaska. Public safety has been the top priority for this administration from day one. And thanks to bipartisan support, as you've seen, we're making real, measurable progress. I also ran for this office with a priority to improve our educational outcomes. And I'm pleased to report progress on this front as well. Nearly 3 years ago, in a bipartisan vote of 41 out of 60 members of the legislature, we passed the Alaska Reads Act to ensure that every student would be proficient in reading by 3rd grade. Now that the Reads Act is being implemented, what are the results showing? The early data is very encouraging. In the last academic year, according to assessments used by school districts across the nation, the percentage of Alaskan students who met early literacy benchmarks grew from 41% to 57%. Among kindergarten students, proficiency rates rose from 24% at the beginning of the year to 60% by the end of the year. According to national data released last June, Alaska students outpaced the national growth in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grades. I need to repeat that since the Reads Act passed, the data shows we are outpacing the nation for reading growth at these grade levels. This is astounding. But it shows how well kids can do when we all focus on reading. Our classroom instructors deserve our thanks for this progress. And I'd like to take a moment for us to thank all the teachers, all the aides, all the principals, everybody who are working so hard to make sure Alaska has the best educational outcomes in the nation. Thank you, guys. In the fall of 2023, research from Harvard University concluded that our charter schools are also the best performing charter schools in the nation. I'll say it again. Our charter schools are the best in the nation. But despite the evidence that parents want choice in public education, despite the evidence that students can succeed in more than one type of environment, there are some very loud voices that show up down here, like the swallows returning to Capistrano with megaphones and T-shirts, telling you and me that the only thing that really matters is money. We even have people that will take the state to the Supreme Court to try and limit student options and force them into a one-size-fits-all model. This is incredible. Thankfully, those people lost. But it shouldn't have to be this way. We shouldn't be fighting over great performing charter schools that parents and educators wish to expand. Parents and students shouldn't be put on a wait list to attend their schools of choice. And yet, every year, there are students on waiting lists trying to get into the school of their choice. Why? Parents know what's best for their kids and the environment they'll do best in. You know what's best for your kids, all of you do, and what environment they'll succeed in. We should be working to expand these opportunities, not stopping them. We shouldn't be wasting precious time and resources here in Juneau or in court fighting with people who want to limit options for parents and students. Shouldn't we be able to agree that what's important is supporting approaches to achieve better outcomes under the umbrella of public schools and ensuring needed funding is in place to support all school programs? These schooling options, charter schools and public homeschooling, are public schools. They're not private schools like some would want us to believe. I'll talk to anyone about money if the conversation is also about different approaches and better outcomes. And that's why my education initiatives will include, that's what my educational initiatives will include this year. Our job is not to favor one over another and be led by special interests, but to serve all students by giving them as many choices as possible. Like education and public safety, I also ran for this office to ensure the state lives within its means. Over 6 budgets, this administration has held operating spending growth to just 8% since 2019. And the budget I've introduced for the next fiscal year is consistent with this trend while providing key investments in education, public safety, energy and affordability in housing and childcare. Holding spending in check has helped us put money into savings for times when oil prices are low, pay down debt, and improve our credit ratings, all while providing the essential services Alaskans expect. But money doesn't grow on trees. If we want more money for programs, we need more resource placed to fund them. That's the deal we made to become a state. That's how we overcame opponents to statehood who didn't believe we could support ourselves by taxing such a small population. We can support ourselves by creating more wealth from our resources, not pickpocketing cash from each other's pockets. Our permanent fund and our dividend paid as our people's rightful share of our resource wealth were built through the foresight of those who came before us and are the envy of fellow states. The fund has largely grown through the savings from our oil production, and it will grow further with deposits from future carbon markets once they are set up, as well as the Alaska LNG project and our mineral riches, as well as new projects on the North Slope. I also ran for this office to attract investment to Alaska, and under this administration, our business environment has remained stable and predictable. As a result, we've attracted billions of dollars of investments on the North Slope from our well-known operators and new entrants to the state. Forecasts are not written in stone, and decline is not inevitable as well. Decline is a choice, and I reject that choice. Most Alaskans, I believe, reject that choice. 10 years ago, in the 2014 revenue forecast, our North Slope production was predicted to be just 314 barrels per day by 2024. If that prediction had come true, if we had allowed it to become true, we'd be preparing to dismantle one of the greatest engineering marvels the world has ever seen in the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline. Instead, our production last year was nearly 150,000 barrels per day greater than the 2014 forecast. And we are poised for additional growth in the coming years. As mentioned earlier, future production at the Nuna Field and Willow and Pika are only the beginning of a North Slope renaissance that will sustain our pipeline operations and stabilize our revenue for decades to come. At peak production, Willow, Pika, and Nuna will total about 280,000 barrels per day. That's more than half of our current volume in the pipeline. In a few years, because of this investment on the slope, we can be reporting overall production of over 650,000 barrels per day. That doesn't even account for the restoration of our opportunities at ANWR and full potential at NPRA under the Trump administration. ADA's leases that are being restored by the Trump administration are well situated to recover large amounts of some 3 to 4 billion barrels of oil estimated to lie in the northwest corner of the 1002 area. The Department of Interior estimates the state could see as much as an additional $2 billion per year in revenue if ANWR is fully developed. We can develop our way to prosperity if we're given the opportunity and we take advantage of it, just the way our future was envisioned at statehood. This administration has done its part to hang up the Open for Business sign on Alaska. And as governor, I couldn't be more excited about the next 4 years under the most pro-Alaskan president we've had ever in President Donald J. Trump. President Trump singled out Alaska out of all the 50 states for its own series of executive orders. This is unprecedented and demonstrates his view of the importance of Alaska as a solution to America's energy, manufacturing, and national security issues. We have a second chance at opportunities that look like they slipped away just 4 years ago. ANWR, the Ambler Mining District, NPRA, the Tongass, the King Cove Road, more than 5 million acres of overdue state land transfers, and so much more. The last administration took more than 6 executive orders and actions against Alaska. And it's no exaggeration that we were sanctioned more heavily than countries like Iran and Venezuela for the past 4 years by our own federal government. Now, under the Trump administration, we have hope. Now, under the Trump administration, we have hope for billions of dollars in opportunities, thousands of jobs, and increased economic and national security for Alaskans, our fellow Americans, and our allies around the world. All we have to do is embrace these opportunities and make sure we have policies in place that let the world know we are open for business, not just on federal lands, but state lands as well. Nobody can compete with our natural resources of every kind, including timber, minerals, oil, gas, land, water, and renewables. But in order to take advantage of our God-given resources, we must compete on policy with other states and sovereigns. We have the resources. We have the location on the globe, but we need the policies that give us the edge as an investment destination for private capital. To this end, my administration will be introducing legislation to ensure we have the most competitive licensing process that attracts professional talent and allows them to get to work quickly. To this end, the executive branch will be continually reviewing our permitting and regulatory processes to find efficiencies and remove barriers to investment and opportunities. We'll also be introducing a comprehensive education bill to ensure our schools have the best outcomes in the nation. We need the best trained workforce for the opportunities coming our way. And my proposed budget contains multiple initiatives to build this workforce for the future. And this will become a reality with your support. We need to get more Alaska lands also into the hands of Alaskans. And we'll be reintroducing legislation from last session to give every Alaskan a chance to live the Alaskan dream and get a piece of the last frontier. We need to manage our forest sustainably rather than watch our wealth go up in smoke every summer. And we'll be introducing legislation to this end to develop our vast untapped timber resources. These are policy decisions, and they're in our control, whether they're my ideas or your ideas. I don't really care whose idea it is, as long as it's moving Alaska forward and making us the most competitive place to live, raise a family, and do business. We need to craft these policies together. Not policies that are hers or his, but are policies for all Alaskans. Alaska is not an experiment anymore, like we were in 1959 when we joined the Union under a statehood compact unlike any other. We are required to develop our resources and settle our lands for the benefit of our people. We are not a fantasy or a folly, as the Alaska Purchase was called by critics of Secretary of State William Seward in 1867. Alaska has always been a place where risk is rewarded and where dreams turn into reality. Alaska has always been a place for those who think big and have a vision for what we can be. For those of us here in this room, we owe it to those who've come before us, for those we serve now, and for generations to come, to think big, to think bold, and to enact policies in order for us to compete. We've proven our ability to provide energy, food, and minerals to our nation and around the world. We've proven our strategic value as a true frontline fort on a dangerous frontier that's regularly being tested by Russian jets and Chinese ships and is at risk from North Korean missiles. We're an Arctic nation because of Alaska, and we stand ready to become the Panama of the North as shipping increases through the Bering Strait and the Northwest Passage. That's our reality. At the same time, Alaska allows the United States to project strength across the globe. We do have vulnerabilities to address here at home. We aren't connected to an electric grid. We're thousands of miles away from markets and dependent on a long and fragile chain for our supply, for our food. Again, that's the reality, and we can't propose policies to shore up our weaknesses unless we recognize these deficits. The good news is we have everything we need to take care of ourselves, and then some here in the great state of Alaska. I see these opportunities everywhere. I see opportunities to make Alaska safer. I see opportunities to increase choice in education and improve outcomes. I see opportunities to make Alaska a more affordable place to live, whether it's housing, childcare, food, or energy. I see the opportunities to monetize carbon, excuse me, and carbon capture and nature-based offsets, creating new revenues for the state of Alaska. I see opportunities that are second to none for energy of all kinds: oil, natural gas, coal, wind, solar, hydro, emerging sources in geothermal, tidal, hydrogen, and advanced nuclear. One energy opportunity should not and does not diminish the other. Things change quickly, and the energy transition as we once knew it just a few years ago is gone. The near future will not be about replacing one source of energy with another. Driven by advancements in supercomputing and artificial intelligence, the future of energy is now additionality from resources of all types. Energy demand is skyrocketing around the globe, and Alaska has everything we need to power and heat our homes and businesses affordably, reliably, and sustainably, while also exporting tremendous resources to the world. We'll address the short-term shortages of natural gas for South Central, and we recognize that some of those solutions may be painful and certainly won't be popular, but they'll be temporary. The last thing we should do is adopt short-sighted solutions to short-term problems that are far more costly in the long run. In the long run, the Alaska LNG project will be a game changer, just like the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was and still is. I don't know about you, but I can't imagine an Alaska without taps. I shudder to think what our state would have become without it. Alaska LNG provides opportunities for low-cost energy, exports, data centers, our idle fertilizer plant, and the thousands of jobs that go with it that will cement our founders' vision of Alaska as a resource giant. We also can't forget that 20% of the income from the Alaska LNG project will be devoted to rural energy projects as well. That's potentially hundreds of millions of dollars per year. This provision in the LNG project will transform the energy landscape in rural Alaska tremendously. Imagine surety of energy at prices comparable to the rail belt. This is what this project can bring. These are the opportunities we have to keep in mind when we're debating policies and resource development. We have a destiny to fulfill, and it's up to us to have the vision and the determination to see it through. We need the Alaska LNG project. We need the Dixon diversion. We need coal and carbon capture. We need wind. We need solar, geothermal, and we need to be able to transmit that power wherever and whenever it's needed. We reformed our rail belt transmission system last year to get rid of market-distorting wheeling charges. And we're taking another step this year to create the financing tools necessary to modernize our grid. Working together, we'll build a transmission system that can serve Alaskans and industries from around the world who are looking north at the same opportunities I see. I see opportunities to feed ourselves and grow our economy by taking advantage of our clean and abundant farmlands and fresh water. And we've taken action to enhance our food security over the past several years since the pandemic threatened our long and fragile supply lines. Last week, I took another major step by introducing an executive order to establish the Alaska Department of Agriculture. The Alaska-grown label shouldn't just be a logo on our sweatshirts. It should be on our tables, in our schools, in our stores, and in our restaurants here and around the world. By creating this department, we'll provide this industry with what it's needed to succeed. We will ensure that agriculture remains a priority for future administrations and legislatures as well. I believe this action will grow an industry that has lacked attention for some time. With your support, we'll stand up this new department over the next 2 years to position it for success. As I've traveled the country and the world during my administration, I'm often struck by how little people know about Alaska. And what they think they know is often very wrong. They may think we can't grow food because it's too cold. They may think we can't have solar power because it's too dark. They may think we can't have natural resource development because our environment is too fragile. They may simply think we just can't compete. I love proving these assumptions wrong. This past year, Alaskans were inspired by the performances of young folks who competed and achieved at the highest levels of their sport and gave us all something to cheer for here in Alaska. We saw Alyssa Pilley's journey from state basketball champion at Anchorage Diamond High to a collegiate All-American at Utah, and then the number 8 overall pick in the WNBA draft by the Minnesota Lynx. At the Summer Olympics, we saw Kristen Faulkner from Homer come out of nowhere to win 2 golds in cycling in Paris. At those same games, Sagan Magdalena joined a list of UA Fairbanks alums to win medals in the shooting sports with a silver in riflery. And in rugby, which wasn't even an Olympic sport until 2016, Chugiak High, Alif Kelter, helped lead the USA to the bronze medal in a thrilling finish. Kelter isn't just a 3-time Olympian. She's also the national team's all-time leading scorer. And we're proud she still calls Alaska home. Whether they were born and raised here or honed their skills here, these young women are a part of Alaska's story, and Alaska is part of theirs. They truly represent the Alaska spirit. When they had an opportunity, they seized it. When they were given a chance, they showed they can lead the world. Alif Kelter is here to represent this Alaskan spirit. So let's take a moment to recognize her achievements and for every Alaskan story like her, every story like hers, that inspire all of us. Alif. I know, I'm dying. I shook her hand earlier today, and she almost broke it. Thanks for being here, and thanks for what you do for Alaska. Really appreciate it. So I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist because I believe in the people of Alaska and the great things we can accomplish together. The people are the reason I've stayed here for more than 40 years. I often tell people this story. They ask me why I stayed here. They say, is it the mountains? Is it the wildlife? It's the rivers. Is it the northern lights? It's the people. The people are the reason I chose to serve as well. I'd like to believe that's the same reason all of us are here, to serve as well. There's no doubt we're going to have our differences over the next few months, but I believe we're going to find more areas where we agree than we don't. That's because we're Alaskans. I believe that our wins are going to be Alaska wins. When we put our minds together to create good policy, great things are going to happen. I'm ready to get to work and to work together, and I know you are too. So I want to thank you again for the invitation to speak with you and our fellow Alaskans tonight. And I want to ask God to bless Alaska. And I want to ask God to bless the great state of Alaska and the United States of America. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
That was Governor Mike Dunleavy's State of the State address, live from the Capitol in Juneau. You've been listening to special coverage from Gavel, Alaska, and KTOO in Juneau. Join us on Wednesday, February 12th at 11 a.m. for the State of the Judiciary address. You can listen right here or watch on KTOO 360 TV. I'm Claire Stremple. Thanks for joining us.